Hello and welcome back to the Straight Line Path podcast. I'm joined here with my co host Peter. In this episode, we speak with John Collins, the founder of Yogen. John has a long and varied work history working for big corporations like Microsoft, Apple, and Snapchat. He has also worked in different areas such as Silicon Valley, Germany, the US, where we speak a little bit about that. He's also involved in the startup ecosphere, acting as an advisor for many startups.
We'll look at John's new startup, Yogen, the inspiration behind it, and how it's going to change the hiring process in the future. We talk about the difficulties of balancing a lean startup model. We also look at the role that a network plays, amongst many other things. We really hope you enjoy this one.
John, thanks for coming on. You're the
Thank you for
founder of
having me.
Yogen. Absolutely. For those listening, what is Yogen and what do you guys do?
Yes. So Yogen is designed to help to improve the hiring process. What we found is that, especially with smaller companies and larger companies as well, that they tend to have hiring processes that are really broken, having candidates go through way too many stages without having an improved risk assessment associated with having those additional stages. So our platform is designed to help to improve that hiring process and to de-risk wherever possible while also reducing down the cost and the time associated with hiring.
What sparked that idea?
Yeah, it was actually from a major pain point I faced. So my background is in actually electrical engineering, and I've worked at a lot of large companies, like at Microsoft and Apple, and I've worked across the United States and in Europe, specifically around Berlin, Germany, for many years. And I saw that the same kinds of problems were often happening with hiring, whether that was associated with smaller startups, larger companies, whether that was European or American companies, Silicon Valley companies, or companies outside of that. And also myself, being a candidate, interviewing at a lot of different places, it feels often like you're jumping through a lot of hoops without a lot of return. You get asked the same questions, maybe between interview stages. People feel, or candidates can often feel like the company was ill prepared for the interview, like, not understanding what kinds of questions they should be asking or kind of winging it off the cuff, or multiple stages of the interview process covering the same kinds of questions or the same kinds of topics, which often leads to conflict when you have two different people that might be assessing on the same area, but they're having different opinions about whether to proceed with a candidate. So from that, I really wanted to have the opportunity to try to address this and change it.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about SMEs. So they're trying to compete with these big, large corporations who probably have dedicated hiring teams and massive resources. What advice would you give those?
Yeah, definitely. What we found is that hiring processes, can be improved across any size company. And it often is the case where candidates, if they're interviewing at multiple companies, if they're interviewing at a company that happens to be at a place where they have a great interview process, they're moving through the stages quickly, people are very kind and well prepared for the interview, that they're willing to have a higher increase offer acceptance rate. And so that is a direct result of having an output of lower costs and better attrition rates as well, when you have employees that feel like they're valued and it represents the company very well. So small changes like this can really help to make companies that might not necessarily have the resources or the brand recognition of larger companies want to interview for them. And even if they can't compete necessarily on salary, which is often the case, candidates are willing to accept a slightly reduced rate of salary if they're having a great interview process and if they're able to proceed with an offer quickly. So that's the competitive advantage that we want to offer those smaller size companies.
Cool. A bit of an interesting question. What is your outlook on the hiring space, the talent space in the next 1 to 5 years? Because I know,
Yeah.
let's say in 2022, for example, it was a very active job market, and now with an uncertain economic climate, AI, what is your outlook?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I constantly think about every day and stay abreast on the market. And I think it's definitely a challenge, working for and founding an HR startup that's focused on hiring when a lot of companies tend to be doing layoffs. Part of this is the fact that some companies overhired during COVID and now they're scaling those resources back. Other companies are offshoring some of that talent for cheaper talent pools in other locations, and other companies are replacing workers with AI or some mixture of the above. Um, Regardless, we think that hiring will still happen, but it might pivot and change. And this is where we're seeing a lot of challenges, especially for like more junior employees, where they're asking for more experience, maybe internships or projects that are very relevant. Or if teams are running lean and they only have a certain budget, they often don't necessarily have the resources or the bandwidth to be able to train up a more junior employee like they could have in the past. These are problems that are outside of the scope of what we believe that we can solve. And it's part of our go to business market strategy that we're simultaneously launching in both Europe and in the United States to cast a wider net accordingly with that. And especially as those hiring processes tend to be quite similar between those two geographic locations. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a matter anymore of just like, oh, we'll go back to school and go get a master's degree or learn AI and then you'll definitely get hired. That's not necessarily the case. And it's quite unfortunate here where I think that a lot of applicant tracking systems have sourcing capabilities within them and they'll do screening of candidates, or some companies will purchase additional screening tools because they're getting so many applications. I mean, it's often the case where they're getting 500,000, 2,000 applications for a single open role. And with AI being able to modify resumes accordingly to have them be matching the job description, this creates a really tough challenge for recruiters to be able to screen through so many of these resumes. In my opinion, these applicant tracking systems and these AI screening tools do a very, very poor job of it. They are often inducing an unconscious bias accordingly with it. They're looking for certain keywords. I don't think they're that sophisticated. I think that there's a lot for a human that isn't often perceived through a resume. And these tools are simply trying to filter out and try to get down this 1,000 applications down to a manageable 20, let's say, that a recruiter can go interview for. Part of that too for us is we believe at Yogen that we can offer advice for this area. We want to be able to help recruiters be more efficient in their roles by defining a good hiring process, and that way there's less administrative work and some of these other areas, and to give them more of a focus for actually talking with more candidates, which we believe is helping to enable recruiters and not replace them with AI tools that are screening out candidates through some black box that isn't transparent. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that was a good response. I have to say, you mentioned about all these AI scanners, these CV scanners, the trackers, and I'd imagine that's quite a lean model for these companies, and it can help them filter through all these applications simultaneously by whatever it is, if it's keywords. How do you aim to price in the market where obviously it could just be an alternative for them? Well, I don't really have to talk to anyone, then I can just throw it all into this algorithm.
Right.
How do you navigate that?
Yeah, pricing has been a big factor, and we spent months trying to do a competitive analysis and talking with potential customers to gain insights about what prices they would be open and willing to kind of support for a tool like ours, improving the hiring process. To talk a little bit more about the HR software space, there's different kinds of tools that kind of can be bucketed. So one is the applicant tracking system tools. This is like Workday or Greenhouse. This is typically what candidates are interacting with when they're doing an application. It's what holds the application. It's what internally the people that are a part of the interview process will provide their feedback in. Sometimes they also offer additional capability for like HR management for like tracking vacation days and such like this. These tools tend to be, they can be free on the very cheap end for basic functionality, or potentially like thousands of dollars per employee for using it. It can be incredibly expensive and very difficult, like a multi-year endeavor for implementation and integration in with the company and doing a transition to new ATS systems. Then there's other types of software, which is like LinkedIn recruiter licenses, which can be also incredibly expensive. I mean, these can range anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per recruiter to have access to this specialty software for doing active sourcing. So like looking up types of candidates on LinkedIn. And then there's other tools like what I mentioned, which is like doing the sourcing or doing actively trying to use AI or other functionality to filter out for candidates. Those can range in the cost of like hundreds of dollars per month. All of these tend to have a cost benefit analysis and a certain amount of time savings that is promised towards that. I mean, I might be a little bit biased here as we're creating additional HR software within this tech stack, but like you could also save a lot of money by throwing half of the resumes into a garbage bin and easing up your workload. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right solution, but that's a free one, and that's very quick and easy to do. So part of our software package licensing is what we believe to be what we're calling like no-brainer pricing. So this is pricing that typically within companies that match our ICP or the ideal customer profile are willing to kind of experiment with and try out and validate. So that amount from our research is anywhere from like $5,000 to $15,000 per year that they usually have a discretionary budget for trying out software that could help them in their processes or help them save time or effort. And so our pricing model is trying to be underneath that, where they can try out our software, see if it's working for them, validate that we're actually saving them a lot of money, and then hopefully then renew their licensing subscriptions. So yeah, that's why we offer pricing accordingly to try to be within that.
Nice. And does Yogen, have you guys integrated AI? Have you, integrate it into your platform? And also, how has AI, if it has helped at all, with building your platform?
Yeah, we do use AI across both of those. So one is that as we're a 6-person startup, I mean, we have to run super lean, and we use a lot of the vibe coding tools, and we're pretty agnostic to any specific one. We tend to jump around to whatever is the latest one or whichever one offers us the best power at the time, which happens to be changing quite rapidly. So my background being in electrical engineering, I'm not a software engineer by background. I mean, I've done software engineering in my life, but I would not say I'm an expert within that space. But these tools have really allowed for me that when I have an idea in my head to be able to, put it on a paper and create mock-ups and prototypes accordingly. And then we have a small staff of engineers that take those mock-ups, then try to get it into our standardized UI UX, and they also help to make sure that we have security, compliance, and all the requirements necessary for the actual integration. So it's really helped us to speed up for our software launches. I would also say it has a trade-off in that it's really easy to make things very fast, and you can spend a lot of time kind of going down paths that might not be matching what your ideal customer profile needs or wants. And so we constantly have to reevaluate that. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I can maybe make a feature in 4 hours or 8 hours, but is that a good use of my time? And is that moving us a step forward towards the ICP and what the ICP needs? Like that is a constant struggle when you're able to rapidly iterate to take a step back and to refocus and to try to build out that core functionality to solve the exact problem statements that you're promising to your customers. As far as using AI in our product, yes, absolutely. And we've taken a very conscious decision towards this. So in terms of being able to train data sets on our own data, that is incredibly costly. I mean, it could cost us thousands of dollars. And when we're a bootstrap startup, that has taken kind of a different thesis for us, where we don't train on our own data, at least at this point. It's something that we want to do in the future. But because of that, then we are using third-party like LLMs or other AI tools for our functionality. And because of that, and because we're bootstrapped, that also means that we're very cost sensitive. And I mean, we're literally debating pennies when some of our AI tools are running. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, for example, to be driving the kids, to soccer practice in a Ferrari every week. You want to use the right tool for the right job. And what that means is that sometimes there's LLMs that are cheaper. Maybe it's 6 months old, but if it's giving and based on our the playgrounds and having a chance to being able to use it and making sure that it's robust and that it answers the types of questions and feature sets accordingly that we need, then we'll use that cheaper model than the better model if it suits our requirements. So we're constantly doing testing on new AI models. we also have a fundamental thesis towards our product that if an AI cannot be trusted, and in terms of that, what I mean is that if the AI will provide like a risk assessment or feedback that is not repeatable, or that provides feedback that where it could be a negative implication for advice that would not providing our customers a reduced down cost or reduced amount of time, then we don't use AI with that, and we do hard coding for certain functionality in the way that we do it. But if there's AI places where we can provide lower risk impact to our customers, then absolutely we have decided to implement those, and it's worked out incredibly well. Like one example is that we often find that interviewers at a company are never trained on how to interview, or if they are trained, it's usually very minimal. And they're putting themselves out there to represent the company, and they don't know what questions to ask. They don't know how to ask those things. They don't know how to deal with, like, if a candidate is over-promising or maybe is shy or isn't speaking up as much. And so we offer an AI tool where they can practice simulations of talking with different kinds of candidates that might have different kinds of backgrounds, to be able to practice those kinds of corner situations and to get themselves more comfortable with the types of interview questions that they want to ask. And then we provide them feedback about the quality of questions accordingly, and making sure that it matches up with the right profile. So like that's a specific example where we feel like it's low risk towards cost and time impact for our customers. Yeah.
That's a great example as well. I wasn't aware that so many recruiters weren't trained in that interview process. So it's great that you're helping fix that. I had a question about the trade-offs. You mentioned there that picking the right tool for the right thing, but I was also wondering how it works. You said it was a 6-person startup. We've also, a lot of people we talk to have very tight units, 1 person, 2 person, 3 people. How does it work with 6 people, and what are some of the trade-offs you see?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every one of our employees right now is on, sweat equity only until we're able to pull in the right revenue to be able to afford them the salaries that they deserve. And so we have to make trade-offs accordingly also with the people that we bring in and the level of contributions that are there. So we made some conscious decisions at the beginning that we wanted to hire more experienced people within our team, people that were a little bit more autonomous accordingly with that. People often that I've worked with personally throughout my career. But that also means that, people can't work for free, and they can't work for free forever. And so when we're offering the equity, and this was a specific decision that we did with our startup, is that our staff have day jobs, and then they're working on our product usually in the evenings or on the weekends. And it kind of has to balance, life and everything else that goes on. But I think this has worked out well in terms of having the ability where we can work on something that we believe in, that we're passionate about. They're areas that we've also faced problems with. So it's like we don't just have one product person. Like, we're all product people, and we all know what we want to build because we've all kind of faced those problems before. But the makeup of the company that we've had is I'm the founder. We have one expert principal or higher than principal level recruiter who it has recruited across Europe and in the United States, and he's our CPO. And then we have a CTO, a head of engineering, and we have a head of design accordingly with that. So, I mean, within our company, we have, I think, a well mixture and balance of skill sets where we see design as like a critical piece of the puzzle, and having that opportunity, to have somebody fully dedicated to that, it's been a game changer for us. But each one of the roles that we kind of bring in, we have to think about, like, how are they going to make us better? Are they filling in gaps that we want to have? For example, like pretty soon we're going to be doing renewed marketing efforts, having the opportunity to do more cold outreach. That's a really tough thing, and that's not necessarily an experience that myself or my fellow colleagues have had before. So having somebody that might have done that and done that very well, it could potentially be like the next person that we're bringing on board. But each one of these become trade-offs and considerations. Yeah.
And in terms of, you see a lot of people say nowadays, right, since we have ChatGPT, these vibe coding platforms, that anyone can whip up an app, anyone can whip up a software, start a startup without any kind of technical understanding. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, do you think that, this technical understanding, do you think it's becoming underrated now? Or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I would say I'm a little bit in both of those worlds, because I've managed software engineering teams for over a decade, but I'm not necessarily the best, software engineer in the room. And I think that having the ability to change and iterate rapidly, rather than having to like go back to somebody and be like, oh, I want this change. Oh, that isn't working. Go back and go change this, is really quick. But there's a lot of limitations with vibe coding, at least of today. I mean, this story could change in 6 months from now, but like some of the challenges that we're currently facing, and if any of our listeners here today, have extensively used vibe coding, they probably run into similar problems, which is that vibe coding tends to work very well initially, especially if you're on a single thread. But after you get to 15, 20, 30 prompts on that same thread, it kind of starts going off the rails a little bit. It's not necessarily doing what you're asking it to do. It's removing things. It's adding things that you didn't request. And a big part of that is due to the tokenization and the number of, it's referencing all of the previous thread, and so you're getting to like millions of tokens potentially, and it's skipping things or it's summarizing things in order to save on cost, and it starts going off the rails. You can always start up a new thread, but these become challenges within that. I think that there's a lot of capability where those problems will start going away, but like this tends to be where we found that doing mockups is really quick. I mean, like if you're like, okay, I have an idea in my head and I want to get that out there, and I know kind of how that should look, or I know that type of level of functionality. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great resource to being able to do that. But like, could you have a resource that people are going to be, paying potentially thousands of dollars for? You're going to have hundreds of users across it. I think maybe it depends upon the simplicity and the area that's within that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of lowering down that barrier of entry. I mean, it's an amazing thing that anybody can go out there and now, I mean, like, anybody can make like a website, from these tools if they've never done that already. If they can make a simplified app accordingly with that, and that's a great thing. I mean, the fact that like, I mean, my son is 10 years old, for example, and we were making some games in Cursor together. Like, I think that's really cool that we have the capability to be able to do that, and just from the prompts from a 10-year-old, we can make something that's live and working. Is that production ready? Is that going to meet all the security requirements? Is that going to have user protection, personal identifiable information there? Is it going to have the right kinds of logins? I think that this is where still today engineering is still needed in order to make sure that that right level of robustness is there. Also, I mean, the fact that like vibe coding can make thousands of lines of code instantly, it makes it very hard to ensure the level of quality, the level of code comments, etc., and readability is there. It is not necessarily embedded within the vibe coding, and so that makes it extra difficult to be able to debug kinds of issues associated with that. I think it's going to get better and better, and that's a really exciting thing. But I don't see engineering going away yet, and I still see an opportunity where it can now help to make more people designers, more people able to do mock-ups, and more people able to make startups. I think that's a great thing, and that's definitely happening, but engineers are still required.
Yeah, and I think we're of the same opinion now. We see AI bridging that gap, but there still is definitely the need for those technical expertise. And that leads me on to something I've seen, online. A lot of time you've been praised as somebody who has both the technical and the softer skills required. And a big problem in the industry, I would think, and I'm sure you can relate from the hiring process, is that these people with great technical skills can't really advertise it, and they can't sell themselves to these hiring managers. Is that something you are implementing with Yogen? Is this something you're considering? And also, to say on that, how can a technical person improve on those soft skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a little bit of our holy grail functionality, and it's our Trojan horse, is that we really want to help to improve the candidate experience. There are some companies that are out there that do try, improving resumes or helping candidates prep for interviews or doing salary negotiations on their behalf. Um, I I think that some of those tools actually are really great, but the problem is that you're asking for somebody that might be unemployed or on a very limited budget and income, like if they're between jobs, to be paying for some really pricey software. And the thesis with that software is that like people aren't going to be paying for resume writing tools when they're employed. They pay for them when they're unemployed. And so that provides a level of a business model where you really have to like capture as much revenue as possible during this very limited amount of time. And it becomes a little bit like those dating apps, where like once somebody has a partner, that they're not going to be paying for those apps anymore. So sometimes some of those apps like don't necessarily want you to be able to find somebody on there, because that means that you're not going to be paying for their service anymore. Personally, I view this as really predatory. I don't think that's a right thing to do, and I don't think that's a good business model. What I'm trying to do with Yogen is to create a win-win situation where we're creating an improved hiring process that's going to save the company time and money, and is going to, at a minimum, 10x save them over the cost of the software that we're charging for them. And if they do that, then they will also have a great candidate experience along for the ride with that. And candidates don't have to pay for that level of functionality. That is, we debated a lot about this internally in terms of like, who are we charging in terms of our ICP, and who's that right level of the software, and what level of access are they going to get. And this is where we landed on, and I feel proud and happy to say that we're not trying to be predatory, towards candidates. There's certain aspects where, for example, if you've ever interviewed at a company and maybe the company's really got their stuff together and they're doing great, they might provide to the candidate like a PowerPoint or a document or an email that says like, this is who you're going to be interviewing next, and this is the interview stages, and we expect that the interview process is going to take you a month or 6 weeks. I know as a candidate, I probably get that maybe 5% of the time or so. And when I do receive that, I'm like, wow, this is great. Like they really are organized and really have their stuff together. This is just one of the little functionalities that we want to have, is that when a company has defined a hiring process, they can do a one button click and they can create a PDF, and then they can send it out to candidates. That takes away all of that troublesome issues with like, what are we going to include? What information is needed? And instead, it just makes the recruiter's life a lot easier, that they can send that out to all future candidates, and that's making a better hiring process associated with that and a better candidate experience. We found that candidates, while they do, some are very good at interviewing and some also struggle with interviewing. We've considered, for example, like the AI functionality that I just mentioned with doing like those mock interviews. That's really designed for interviewers to practice interviewing candidates. We've considered flipping that script and having candidates practice interviewing with companies. The problem with that is, as we're bootstrapped, every time that somebody is running that AI model, it's roughly costing us anywhere from 10 to 15 cents. And while that is fine for a paying customer, that price could get exorbitant if there's not guardrails associated with that. And you could have potentially thousands of people that are using that service. And so that becomes now, do we need to start charging for candidates? And that's not the business model that we want to have. So we've put that feature behind a paywall. And specifically only targeted that towards companies that are trying to interview candidates associated with that. But that's based on the stage of where we're at and the business model that we've defined. So yeah, those are just some concrete examples.
Yeah. And you mentioned, ICP targeting, ideal customer profile. Who would you say needs Yogen the most? What kind of companies?
Yeah, we've defined this as companies that range roughly in size from 50 people to 1,000 people. So these startups that are anywhere from like Series A to Series D, roughly, they typically have either 0 recruiters, and it's a hiring manager that's typically kind of filling in that role. Like a company that's 50 person size, up to 1,000 person company would typically have recruiters that are in the 2 or 3 range. So just a handful of recruiters that are kind of helping to support potentially 20, 30 kinds of roles. So these are companies that tend to be hiring quite a bit. Maybe they received a recent funding round. They're usually overloaded with the amount of roles that they're trying to hire for. And they might not necessarily have the skill sets to be able to hire for new roles for their company. For example, they're going to be hiring like their first data scientist, but they don't know the norms or what kinds of questions they should ask for data scientists when they're launching in a new location, for example. So we find that Yogen helping to define the interview process and really helping to make sure that recruiters and hiring managers at companies of those sizes can effectively, be a little bit better at the roles.
You also mentioned as well that you are launching not only in the US but in Europe too. I'm curious, do you see the same pain points across Europe and the US, or is there anything specific to the geolocation?
Yeah, there's quite a number of differences, but they tend to be minor. So as I've worked in Silicon Valley, Seattle, Los Angeles, and in Berlin, Germany, most of the hiring processes tend to be quite similar accordingly within those locations. I've also done a lot of hiring in other tech hubs like in London and Lisbon and in Paris, for example. What tends to change is benefits are quite different. Details like probation periods are often very different. Things like how vacations or how sick leave or relocation support is handled can also be quite different. So in terms of the recruiter and doing their offer management, that's where a lot of these discussions kind of become different. And our recommendation always for recruiters, and part of our tooling helps to support this, is to provide candidates this information up front. For example, in the United States, healthcare typically comes from your employer, and that healthcare, at least in the US for a typical company, is often not disclosed with the details until a final offer is given. So, on the company website, they'll be like, yes, we offer healthcare, but it's like, how much do you have to pay out of pocket? Does it cover my family members? Oh, my, spouse is pregnant and I have a big healthcare expense potentially coming up. How much you have to pay out of pocket is a major concern for if that person's going to join the company or not. And I really think it's wild that companies don't disclose this until after you've already been through 2 to 3 months of an interview process, after you've already received an offer, and then you realize that the healthcare is just not up to the package that you require, and therefore your total compensation is going to be less than what you needed. That information, in our opinion, should always be presented up front, and just be transparent about what is the out-of-pocket expenses, for example. That can help to make sure that candidates can potentially self-screen, which can be a great thing. Like if they're like, oh, okay, this isn't going to work for me, then you don't need to go through 2 months of interviewing at a company and potentially get an offer or not get an offer. And then it's just very frustrating when that isn't up to what's required. So providing certain levels of transparency up front, as long as it's within the abilities of the HR team to do so, it offers a lot of capability for already trying to reduce down that level of applications that might be coming in, or having people self-screen, which is a better way of doing it than having an AI black box doing that for you. But again, that's not a concern for a lot of European-based employees, because they get healthcare through the government and through their taxes, so they don't necessarily care about that on that side. So there's areas like that we think offering some advice that are a little bit more local tailored is quite good. But generally, candidates across both locations just want a great hiring process that has minimal number of stages. People are well prepared for the interviews, and therefore can have an offer acceptance rate that's higher.
And working in Silicon Valley in both Europe and the US, was there any major differences you noted? Maybe differences in culture, differences in how people work, especially in the tech space. What did you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Silicon Valley is its own little unique bubble. I mean, it's weird. Like, you'll see, autonomous robots driving down the street, and you'll see like pizza launching apps, that won't be ever releasing anywhere else, and it'll just be kind of like really popular in Silicon Valley. I mean, like, so it tends to kind of be isolated, but of course, there's many companies that have been successfully launching and then growing out of Silicon Valley towards wider audiences. But I'll say a few things. I mean, one is that Silicon Valley has some of the most expensive real estate in the world, and therefore is incredibly difficult to be able to have a basic lifestyle that's there. Even though some of the salaries are some of the highest in the world, it's still impossible for most average engineers to be able to buy a house alone just from a salary that's there, which is unfortunate because most of the places around the world you can do that. So what tends to happen is Silicon Valley is people live and breathe by stock and stock options, and that is the bread and butter of how total compensation is afforded to those kinds of companies. I mean, of course, there's always going to be like the Meta, the Googles of the world that will offer high salaries and stock that's clear. But for most people that are working at Silicon Valley startups, these tend to just be dice rolls. I mean, you're a bit like gambling on if you think the company is going to be successful or not. And then there's stock options associated with that. And when you come in, and if your stock options are underwater or not, I mean, these are all major factors for if you're going to be a multi-millionaire or not, out of this. So it tends to be that with employees in Silicon Valley is that there's high turnover of employees. Attrition is pretty low, or attrition is poor because of that. So if an employee feels like, well, this company didn't achieve their funding round like they expected, or the product didn't get launched successfully, and we didn't have as many customers as what we wanted, therefore my stock options aren't going to do as well, or we're not going to get that next funding round. People typically aren't going to stick around and stay, and they're going to go jump to another startup that they believe will have a higher chance of success. And so because of that, like, this is why the average tenure of an employee at a Silicon Valley company is less than 2 years, because there's a lot of hopping with this. And I mean, I get that, you're not going to stay on a sinking ship, for 10 years out of the loyalty for a company necessarily for that. So that's a very different model than, for example, in Germany, where employees rarely get stock in any company in Germany. If they do get stock, it's usually a very small amount. Germans tend to be much more, I'm generalizing a little bit, but in the German culture, it's much more fiscally conservative with that. They're much more interested in like a base salary, good work-life balance, instead of having these kind of like these lottery tickets to be able to potentially make a lot of money from that stock. It's not to say that there isn't that case. I mean, there's some companies that have kind of modeled themselves after more of like a Silicon Valley based tech company, but because of that, there tends to be a little bit more like tiers of companies in Germany. So there's those top tiers that are going to pay a lot. There's those mid tiers, which can be great companies, but they're not necessarily going to offer a lot. And then there's like lower tier companies that might be offering a lot less. And it's not that, like, compared to the US, where those lower tier companies might just be offering a lot of stock to offset their lower pay. In Germany, you're just going to get lower pay, and therefore employees often also tend to stay at a company. Probation periods can be quite stressful and difficult to navigate, and so having that level of stability, especially if like there's good work-life balance, employees will stick around a lot longer towards that, and take a lot of value in terms of their personal life outside of work. So yeah, those are just some of the differences I've seen.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you've seen these firsthand, and you can relay, I think, what a lot of us would think in the market. I'm just curious about the Silicon Valley. You mentioned the bubble. It's its own kind of space, and for founders, that can be so important. Getting the right environment, getting the right people around them. Would you think that is something, one, Europe needs to improve on? And two, if somebody can't get into one of those bubbles, maybe they're constrained by location or whatever, how important is a mentor?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this was often frustrating for me when I lived in Germany in terms of the stock, especially when I was so used to receiving stock from working, for Silicon Valley companies previously, where there just like wasn't the same level of understanding about what it can offer, and the same level of, I guess, like incentivizing employees towards the company's success, and having people align through that was very different towards German companies. This isn't true of all German companies. I also worked for a Lithuanian-based company, and they tended to be better towards this, which was about taxes associated with stock that you would receive. So, like in Germany, at least when I lived there, the taxes for stock were taxed as normal income, while in the US, stock gets taxed much more favorably for employees. So that also really helps to generate wealth accordingly. Lithuania did, in my opinion, a very good job with trying to attract more startups, and a big factor for doing that was by having strong tax incentive programs for not taxing as much accordingly with stock that was given to employees. And so I think that Europe is a big place with a lot of different people, and there's bureaucracy, and there's the European Union, and then there's, country governments and local regional governments. But I found that when it's not just about investment from the government themselves, but it's also about how are you trying to attract employees and have employees want to stay there. When I worked in Germany, we often would hire employees from around the world, and it was something that we were very proud of and saw it as an advantage for us, because Germany itself was a place where many people from around the world want to live and work. And so that would attract already a large number of well-qualified applicants. And then we had a relocation budget associated with that. And we had a visa team kind of handling those kinds of things. And Germany did a very good job. And as a factor for why I moved to Germany, of their blue card visa, which allows, it's relatively straightforward. That if you meet the minimum requirements by having a degree, having a certain level of education, and having a certain minimum income, and you have a job offer, that you're pretty much guaranteed a visa. Not necessarily guaranteed for everyone of every country, but for many people, it was a relatively straightforward and quick process. Surprisingly for Germany, there was less bureaucracy on that side. And so for me, compared to moving to different countries where that could be a very difficult and long process, that was very quick for me. As a US citizen, I felt very privileged in that situation. But then also that Germany provides a path towards citizenship, a quick path from a blue card into getting that citizenship in a period of roughly 5 years. Might take a little bit longer. It can be shorter if you have language proficiency. But, I think, in my opinion, Germany is world class in terms of trying to offer that. If you look at Switzerland-based companies, it's very hard to get Swiss citizenship as an outsider. Accordingly, with that, very hard for people that are going to Sweden. Let's say they want to go work at Spotify, for example, and go work in Stockholm. It can take years, decades sometimes, for people to get citizenship. While Germany offers a very clear path towards that, but Germany is doing, in my opinion, a poor job of offering those tax incentives for startups for research and development, also for their early employees. So I think that there's trade-offs, and different countries have different norms and regulations and moving forward. But generally, I as a fan, I think that the European Union is taking a lot of strong steps towards that. Silicon Valley is kind of world leading, and I think that there's a lot of areas that they can learn from that side. But it's not necessarily to say that Silicon Valley is perfect. By all means, it can be a difficult and brutal place to live and work, just due to the nature of the cost of living that's associated with that, and kind of the churn that often happens with people. Then to answer your other part to your question in terms of mentorship, yes, absolutely. I think mentors are incredibly valuable. There's different aspects where I'm an advisor at a number of startups, and that normally comes with a contractual commitment where I support them for a certain number of hours per week in terms of in return for getting a small amount of equity towards that. That way we're both aligned for the output of that company. I think that that's one way to kind of get mentors, is that you can offer that, but then you're also getting a certain level of committed support on a regular basis. And, they're opening up their Rolodex, so to speak, for having their network be open for helping you succeed, because if you succeed, then they succeed. But mentorships shouldn't necessarily come with that contractual commitment. They can come with just offering a level of support and guidance. And that's been a very powerful thing in my life. So absolutely.
John, you are building something very, very impressive. People forward. It really feels like it's for the people. I know you're going to help the companies, but I think personally, anyone who's looking for a job is going to be very happy if they see the company is supported by your company, Yogen. Where can people go? They want to stay up to date. They want to be connected. They want to look at what you're doing. Where should they go?
Yeah, I super appreciate that. And thank you for that feedback. They can go to getyogen.com. This is our website where we're posting up all the details about how to get a free trial. They can sign up for our free audit functionality. The audit will always be free. The audit is a capability where if you're in a position at your company, whether you're a recruiter or your hiring manager, and recruiting is a black box to you, like you don't know the cost, you don't know the level of risk. Maybe you just came into the company, or you've never done an audit for what your current costs are. You can use our service for free in 10 or 15 minutes or so, answer some basic questions, and we'll give you an estimated cost of your current hiring process and areas where you're doing well in and areas where you can improve in. And then if you want to take action on improving those areas and reducing down your costs, then you can pay for our services. And again, we're trying to price it at a position where we're 1/10 of the cost of the savings that we're expecting to offer companies. Getyogen.com.
Perfect. And on a personal note, LinkedIn the best place?
Yes, my LinkedIn username is John Christopher Collins, and yeah, happy to accept anybody that messages me and continue the conversation.
Thanks so much for coming on, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.